The quiet before midnight, Ruby Thompson wiped down the last table in her small coffee shop, her shoulders aching from another long day. The clock on the wall showed 11:47 p.m., and outside the December rain painted streaks down the windows. She had named this place Moonbeam Coffee after her grandmother's favorite phrase, "Coffee tastes best under moonlight." Sweetheart, 3 years ago, opening this shop had felt like honoring a promise. Tonight, it felt like carrying a boulder uphill. The bills were piling up faster than customers were coming in. The bigger chain stores were squeezing out small businesses like hers, one discount promotion at a time. Ruby sighed, untying her brown apron with the hand-embroidered moon on the pocket. Her grandmother had stitched it herself. Back when dreams felt possible instead of exhausting, she was reaching for the light switch when she heard it. A gentle knock on the glass door. Ruby froze. Who comes to a coffee shop 3 minutes before midnight? Through the rain-blurred window, she could make out a tall figure in a dark coat. Something about his posture seemed tired, almost desperate. Ruby's practical side screamed at her to pretend she hadn't heard. To go home to her small apartment above the shop and sleep. But her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Kindness costs nothing, Ruby girl." With a deep breath, Ruby walked to the door and cracked it open. The stranger in the rain? A man standing there looked like he'd walked out of a business magazine. Even soaked by rain, his charcoal coat screamed expensive. Water dripped from his dark hair, and his blue eyes held an exhaustion that went deeper than physical tiredness. He was handsome in that sharp, almost intimidating way that made Ruby immediately aware of her flour-stained jeans and messy ponytail. "We're closed," Ruby said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I know." His voice was smooth, cultured, nothing like the truck drivers and students who usually filled her shop. "I saw your light on. I just need 1 cup of coffee. Please. It's been the longest day of my life." There was something raw in his tone that made Ruby's resolve crumble. She stepped back, opening the door wider. "All right, 1 cup. But I'm charging you double for keeping me past closing time." The ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Fair enough." He walked in, leaving puddles on her worn wooden floor, and chose a seat by the window. Ruby moved behind the counter, her hands automatically reaching for the espresso beans. "What would you like?" "Surprise me," he said, loosening his tie. "Something that makes midnight feel less lonely." Ruby paused, studying him with new curiosity. She'd served thousands of customers, learned to read moods and coffee orders. This man didn't want just caffeine. He wanted comfort. She began crafting a cinnamon honey latte, her grandmother's secret recipe for hard days. "Rough day at the office?" Ruby asked, steaming the milk to silky perfection. He laughed, but it sounded hollow. "You could say that. I made decisions today that will affect thousands of people's jobs. Signed contracts that felt more like prison sentences. Smiled for cameras when all I wanted was to disappear." Ruby set the latte in front of him, the foam art forming an imperfect heart. "Sounds exhausting." "What do you do?" "I run a company." He wrapped his hands around the warm cup, inhaling deeply. "God, this smells like childhood memories I forgot I had. It's the cinnamon. My grandmother's touch." Ruby leaned against the counter, surprising herself by staying to talk. "She always said the best coffee should make you remember the good parts of life." He took a sip, and his eyes closed. When they opened again, they were brighter, more present. "This is extraordinary. I've had coffee in Paris, Rome, Tokyo. Nothing comes close to this." "You're either lying or you've been drinking terrible coffee," Ruby teased. Feeling herself relax, "I'm Julian," he said suddenly, extending his hand across the counter. "Ruby." She shook his hand, noticing how warm it was despite the rain. "So, Julian who drinks coffee at midnight, what brings you to my tiny corner of Seattle? You don't exactly look like you belong in this neighborhood." Midnight confessions. Julian's smile faded into something more genuine, less polished. "That's exactly why I'm here. I spent all evening at a fundraiser downtown. Everyone wanted something from me. Investors wanting promises. Journalists wanting quotes. Partners wanting commitments. I just started walking after it ended, trying to clear my head. Then I saw your light." And you thought a broke coffee shop owner could solve your problems? Ruby asked, but her tone was gentle. No, I thought maybe I could sit somewhere where nobody knows my name, where I don't have to be anyone but a guy who needs good coffee. He took another sip, savoring it. You have no idea how rare that is. Ruby understood more than he knew. She'd left her corporate marketing job 3 years ago, tired of the politics and fakeness. I get it. Sometimes the smallest places offer the biggest escapes. They fell into easy conversation. Julian asked about the shop, and Ruby found herself telling him about her grandmother, about the struggles of keeping a small business alive, about her fear that she might fail the memory of the woman who'd raised her. She didn't know why she was sharing so much with a stranger. Something about the late hour and the rain outside made honesty feel natural. Julian listened in a way people rarely did anymore. No checking his phone, no interrupting, just genuine attention. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment before speaking. My father died when I was 23, he said softly. Left me a company I wasn't ready to run, expectations I couldn't meet, and a legacy I'm still trying to honor. Some days I wonder if I'm building something meaningful, or just maintaining an empire, because I'm too afraid to let it go. Ruby's heart squeezed. Beneath the expensive clothes and polished exterior sat someone just as lost as she felt sometimes. That sounds incredibly lonely. It is. Julian met her eyes, and something unspoken passed between them. Understanding, maybe? Recognition of similar wounds? Which is why this matters. He gestured at the coffee, the shop, the moment. This is the first time in months I've felt like just a person, not a position. The clock chimed midnight, the soft bells echoing through the empty shop. Neither of them moved to acknowledge it. Can I ask you something? Ruby said, refilling his cup without asking. If you could walk away from it all, would you? Julian considered the question seriously. I used to think yes. Now I'm not sure. The company employs over 50,000 people. Their mortgages, their children's educations, their futures depend on the decisions I make. Walking away would be selfish. Or it would be self-preservation, Ruby countered gently. You can't pour from an empty cup, Julian? He smiled at that, really smiled. Is that coffee shop philosophy? It's grandmother wisdom. She had a lot of it. Ruby found herself smiling back. She also said that the universe sends you what you need when you're brave enough to stay open past closing time, and I'm grateful you were brave tonight. Julian finished his coffee and stood reluctantly. What do I owe you? And I meant it about double for the late hour. $20, Ruby said, knowing full well it should be $6. Julian pulled out his wallet and placed a $100 bill on the counter. Keep the change. Consider it payment for the therapy session. That's too much, Ruby protested. It's not nearly enough for what you gave me tonight. His eyes held hers. Ruby, can I come back? Tomorrow night? Same time? Ruby's practical side screamed warnings. Rich strangers don't just show up at coffee shops for friendly conversation. But her heart, that foolish thing, whispered yes. We close at 10. I'll knock at midnight, he said, heading for the door. He paused with his hand on the handle, looking back. Thank you for opening the door. Most people wouldn't have. Most people aren't foolish enough to run a coffee shop that barely breaks even, Ruby replied. But she was smiling. After he left, Ruby stood in the empty shop, holding the $100 bill and wondering what she'd just started. Outside, the rain had stopped, and through the window, the moon emerged from behind clouds, casting silver light across the wet street. She didn't know that Julian Blackwood was the CEO of Blackwood Technologies, one of the largest tech companies in the world. She didn't know his face appeared regularly in financial newspapers and business magazines. She didn't know that tomorrow her life would begin changing in ways she couldn't imagine. All she knew was that, for the first time in months, the weight on her shoulders felt a little lighter. And as she locked up the shop and climbed the stairs to her apartment, Ruby caught herself hoping that tomorrow night she'd hear that knock on the door again. The universe, it seemed, was listening to grandmother's wisdom after all. The knock that became a habit the next night, Ruby found herself glancing at the clock every few minutes after 10. She'd told herself all day that Julian probably wouldn't return. Men like him didn't make habits of visiting tiny coffee shops. He'd probably woken up, remembered he had important business things to do, had forgotten all about Moonbeam coffee. But at 11:58 p.m., as Ruby was wiping down the espresso machine, the knock came. Gentle, almost apologetic. Her heart jumped in a way that annoyed her. Julian stood outside, this time without the rain, but with the same exhausted eyes. Tonight he wore jeans and a simple navy sweater, looking almost normal except for the watch on his wrist that probably cost more than her entire month's rent. "You came back," Ruby said, opening the door. "I promised I would." He stepped inside, and somehow the shop felt warmer with him in it. Is that surprising? In my experience, people say a lot of things at midnight they don't mean in the morning. Ruby moved behind the counter, already reaching for the espresso beans. "Same as yesterday?" "Please." Julian settled into the same seat by the window. "And Ruby, I meant everything I said last night, including the part about this being the best coffee I've ever had." Over the next 2 weeks, it became their routine. Every night at midnight, Julian would knock. Every night, Ruby would open the door. They'd talk for an hour, sometimes 2, about everything and nothing. He told her about board meetings that felt like battles. She told him about the regular customer who always left exact change plus a nickel. He shared his frustration with business partners who only saw profit margins. She shared her fear that she'd have to close the shop by spring. They laughed over silly things. Ruby discovered Julian had never learned to cook, lived on takeout and restaurant meals. Julian discovered Ruby had a terrible singing voice, but sang anyway while closing up each night. They debated whether pineapple belonged on pizza. Julian said yes. Ruby said absolutely not. And whether artificial intelligence would save or doom humanity, they both had concerns. What Ruby didn't know was that Julian had started leaving his office at 10:30 every night, dismissing his driver 3 blocks away so he could walk to Moonbeam Coffee. What Julian didn't know was that Ruby had started wearing her nicest jeans and the sweater that brought out her eyes, telling herself it was just because she felt like dressing better. Neither of them acknowledged what was obviously growing between them. It felt too fragile, too precious to name. The night everything changed on the 15th night. Julian arrived earlier than usual, at 11:30. Ruby was still helping her last customer, a college student cramming for finals. When the student left, Julian was standing by the door with an unusual expression. "You're early," Ruby said. "Everything okay? I need to tell you something." Julian ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she'd learned meant he was struggling with words. "I haven't been completely honest with you." Ruby's stomach dropped. Here it comes, she thought. The wife, the girlfriend, the reason this was too good to be true. "My full name is Julian Blackwood," he said carefully, watching her face. "I'm the CEO of Blackwood Technologies." Ruby blinked, then blinked again. The name sounded familiar, tickling the edge of her memory. "Should that mean something to me?" Julian looked almost relieved. "You really don't know?" "I don't follow business news much," Ruby admitted. "I'm too busy trying to keep my own business alive to worry about other people's companies." He pulled out his phone and showed her. There he was, on the Forbes homepage. Julian Blackwood, tech titan, the billion-dollar man behind tomorrow's innovations. Ruby's mouth fell open. "You're a billionaire," she said flatly. "But technically, yes." Julian put his phone away quickly. "But Ruby, that's not who I am when I'm here. Here I'm just Julian, who likes your coffee and your company." Ruby's mind raced. The expensive watch made sense now. The way he'd tipped $100 without blinking. The exhaustion from decisions affecting thousands of people. It all clicked into place, and with it came a wave of inadequacy. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked quietly. "Because this was the only place where I could just be myself." Julian's voice carried a desperation that made her look up. "Every relationship I have is built on what I can do for people. My money, my connections, my influence. You're the first person in years who's talked to me like I'm just a regular human being. I was afraid if you knew that would change." "It does change things," Ruby said, and saw him flinch. "Julian, look at me. Look at this place. She gestured around the small shop with its mismatched chairs and peeling paint. I'm barely keeping this business alive. You probably spend more on lunch than I make in a week. We live in completely different worlds. I don't care about that, Julian said fiercely. Maybe you don't, but everyone else will. Ruby felt tears threatening and hated herself for it. I'm not naive, Julian. I know how this works. The billionaire and the broke coffee shop girl. That's not a romance. That's a headline. When worlds collide, the tension hung between them until Julian finally spoke. Let me prove you wrong. Tomorrow night, I'm hosting a small gathering at my place. Business associates, but casual. Come with me. See that my world isn't as scary as you think. Every instinct told Ruby to say no. But looking at his hopeful face, she found herself nodding. Okay, one night. The next evening, a car arrived to pick Ruby up. Not just any car, a sleek black vehicle with a driver in a suit. Ruby felt absurd climbing into it wearing her nicest dress. A simple green thing she'd bought for her cousin's wedding too. Years ago, Julian's place turned out to be a penthouse that occupied the entire top floor of a downtown building. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the Seattle skyline glittering like scattered diamonds. The furniture looked like art installations. Everything screamed money in a way that made Ruby's chest tight. Julian met her at the elevator, and his face lit up when he saw her. You look beautiful. I look like I raided someone else's closet, Ruby muttered. But she was smiling despite her nerves. The gathering was small, maybe 20 people, but they all radiated the same polished confidence. Startup founders, investors, tech executives. Ruby nursed a glass of wine and tried to blend into the background. So you're the mysterious coffee shop girl, a woman in a silver dress said, peering beside Ruby. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Everyone's been dying to meet you. Julian never brings anyone to these things. I'm just a friend, Ruby said automatically. The woman's gaze was sharp, assessing. You know, Julian's last girlfriend was a fashion model. The one before that was a venture capitalist. I'm just wondering what angle you're working. Ruby felt her face flush. I'm not working any angle. I serve him coffee. That's all. Sure it is. The woman drifted away, leaving Ruby feeling small and exposed. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of awkward conversations and feeling hopelessly out of place. Everyone wanted to talk about stock options and market disruptions and things Ruby barely understood. When someone asked what she did, and she mentioned her coffee shop, the polite interest in their eyes faded instantly. By the time Julian drove her home himself, Ruby was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. That was a disaster, she said as they pulled up to Moonbeam Coffee. What? No, everyone loved you, Julian protested. Julian. Ruby turned to face him in the dim car. Your ex-girlfriend is a supermodel. Your world is penthouses and private drivers and people who think in millions. My world is worrying if I can make rent and serving coffee to truck drivers at dawn. This can't work. Why are you so determined to believe that? Julian's frustration was evident. Ruby, I don't care about the money difference. But everyone else does. That woman in the silver dress basically accused me of being a gold digger. And she's probably not wrong to be suspicious. Why would someone like you want someone like me unless I was after something? Because you're real, Julian said intensely. Because you talk to me like I'm human. Because your coffee shop feels more like home than anywhere I've lived in 10 years. Because when I'm with you, I remember who I am underneath all the business suits and board meetings. Ruby's heart ached. She wanted to believe him so badly it hurt, but fear held her tongue. I need to think, she whispered. This is all too much. She climbed out of the car before he could respond, practically fleeing into her shop. Behind her, she heard his car door open. Ruby, wait, Julian called, but she was already inside, locking the door with shaking hands. Through the window, she saw him standing on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, looking more lost than she'd ever seen him that night. For the first time since they'd met, there was no midnight coffee. The shop stayed dark, and Ruby sat upstairs in her apartment, crying over something that had never really begun. The coffee that went cold. 3 days passed. Julian didn't come by. Ruby told herself it was for the best, that she'd made the right choice protecting her heart. But the shop felt emptier somehow. Midnight felt lonelier on the fourth day. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I'm sorry if I pushed too hard. I just want you to know that meeting you changed something in me. Whatever happens, thank you for reminding me what it feels like to be just Julian. The coffee shop door is always open if you need it. Take care, Ruby J." Ruby read it 17 times, each time feeling her resolve crack a little more. She was about to respond when she saw it. Her phone had been buzzing all day with notifications she'd been ignoring. Now she looked. The headlines were everywhere. Tech CEO Julian Blackwood spotted with mystery woman. There were photos of them at his penthouse gathering. Photos of her getting into his car, even a grainy photo of them through the coffee shop window. Worse were the comments. Gold digger, social climber, trophy girlfriend. People picked apart her appearance, her background, her obvious unsuitability for someone of Julian's status. Ruby's phone rang. Her best friend Diane, who ran a bookstore 3 blocks away. "Ruby, please tell me you're not dating Julian Blackwood without telling me." "I'm not dating him," Ruby said numbly. "We're just friends. Well, the internet thinks differently. And Ruby, some of the things they're saying are brutal. Are you okay?" Ruby wasn't okay. She felt exposed, judged by thousands of strangers who knew nothing about her. The weight of public scrutiny pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. That night, at exactly midnight, the knock came anyway. Ruby almost didn't answer. But something made her feet move, made her hand reach for the lock. Julian stood there, and he looked worse than she felt. His hair was disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed. "I saw the articles," he said hoarsely. "Ruby, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. It was always going to happen," Ruby replied, but she opened the door wider. "Come in." They sat at their usual table by the window. But tonight there was no coffee, no easy conversation. Just 2 people caught between impossible choices. "I can fix this," Julian said. "I'll have my PR team issue a statement that we're just friends. I'll make the attention go away. Will you?" Ruby asked. "Or will it just get worse?" "Julian, I've been thinking about this for days. Maybe we're both holding on to something that can't exist in the real world. Maybe midnight magic doesn't survive in daylight." "Don't say that." Julian reached across the table, taking her hand. His palm was warm, solid, real. "Ruby, I'm falling for you. I know the timing is terrible and the circumstances are complicated, but that doesn't change how I feel." Ruby's breath caught. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Julian, you don't have to say anything back," he continued quickly. "I just need you to know. You've made the last 3 weeks the best I've had in years. The thought of losing you because of headlines and strangers' opinions makes me want to burn it all down." For a long moment, Ruby just looked at him. At this man who'd walked into her life by accident, who'd somehow become the best part of her days, or rather, her midnights. "I'm scared," she whispered finally. "I'm scared of getting hurt. I'm scared of your world. I'm scared that I'm not enough." "You're everything," Julian said fiercely. "But I understand if you need time. I'll wait. A week, a month, a year. Whatever you need." Ruby stood up, and Julian's face fell, thinking she was ending it. Instead, she walked to the espresso machine. "We never had our midnight coffee tonight," hope flickered in his eyes. "No, we didn't." As Ruby prepared to lattes, her hands steady despite her racing heart, she made a decision. Fear had controlled too much of her life already. It had kept her in a corporate job she hated for years before she finally opened the shop. It had stopped her from taking chances, from believing in possibilities. Maybe this wouldn't work. Maybe the world would be too much. But maybe, just maybe, it was worth trying to find out. She set the coffee in front of Julian, their hands brushing as he reached for the cup. The touch sent electricity up her arm, and from the way his eyes darkened, he felt it too. "I'm not promising this will work," Ruby said softly. "I'm not promising I won't freak out again when things get hard. But Julian, I'm willing to try. If you are?" The smile that broke across Julian's face was like sunrise after a long night. "I've never been more sure of anything." They drank their coffee in comfortable silence, and when Julian left that night, he kissed her cheek gently. Just a soft press of lips that somehow meant more than words could say. Ruby locked up the shop with a lighter heart than she'd had in days. Outside, the moon hung full and bright, and she could almost hear her grandmother's voice. Sometimes the best things come after closing time, Ruby girl. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The media wouldn't disappear overnight. The difference in their worlds wouldn't magically vanish. But tonight, under the moonlight that gave her shop its name, Ruby chose to believe in possibilities. She just didn't know that the hardest test was still to come. When the world intrudes for 2 weeks, Ruby and Julian existed in their careful bubble. He came to Moonbeam Coffee every night at midnight, and they talked until the early morning hours. She learned that he'd taught himself piano as a child to cope with his father's impossible expectations. He learned that she'd once dreamed of being a writer before practicality took over. Ruby started to believe. Maybe they could make it work. The media attention had died down to occasional mentions. Regular customers teased her good-naturedly about her fancy boyfriend. Even Diane, her skeptical best friend, admitted that Julian seemed genuinely devoted. Then the photograph appeared. Ruby was restocking coffee beans on a Tuesday morning when her phone exploded with notifications. Diane burst through the door, tablet in hand, face pale. "Ruby, I'm so sorry. You need to see this before someone else tells you." Headline screamed across the screen. Blackwood's big announcement. Tech billionaire. Engaged to banking heiress Vivian Chen. Below it, a photograph. Julian, in a sharp suit, standing beside a stunning woman with porcelain skin and a $1 million smile. Her hand rested on his arm, a massive diamond catching the camera flash. Ruby's world tilted. The tablet slipped from Diane's hands, clattering on the counter. But the image had already burned itself into Ruby's brain. "There has to be an explanation," Diane said. But her voice lacked conviction. Ruby couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Her phone buzzed Julian calling, but her fingers wouldn't move to answer it. The phone kept ringing, over and over, until finally the shop's landline rang too. Diane answered. "Julian, what the actual hell?" Pause. "She's right here, but I don't think another pause." "Fine. You have 5 minutes." She hung up. "He's coming over right now." "Ruby, do you want me to stay?" Ruby shook her head. "I need to do this alone." Diane squeezed her hand and left. Ruby stood behind the counter, gripping the edge until her knuckles turned white. The bells above the door chimed 15 minutes later. Julian looked frantic. His tie was askew, hair disheveled, like he'd been running his hands through it. "Ruby, please let me explain." "Explain what?" Ruby's voice came out steadier than she felt. "That photo looks pretty self-explanatory. It's not what you think." Julian took a step closer and Ruby took one back. He stopped, pain flashing across his face. "That photo is from a charity gala 6 months ago. Someone leaked it this morning with a fake engagement announcement. Vivian Chen and I dated briefly 2 years ago. It ended amicably. We're not together. We're not engaged." "I would never. How do I know that's true?" Ruby interrupted. The words tasted bitter. "Julian, I don't know your world. I don't know how these things work. Maybe you have a society fiancé and a coffee shop girl on the side? Maybe that's just what billionaires do, Ruby." "No." Julian looked stricken. "I called my lawyers the second I saw that article. They're issuing cease and desist letters right now. The publication will retract it by tonight. But the damage is done." Ruby gestured around the empty shop. "I've had 12 people come in this morning just to stare at me, to whisper and take pictures. My regulars are treating me like I'm a spectacle. This is my business, Julian. My grandmother's legacy. And now it's becoming a circus because of me. Because of us." "I'll fix it," Julian said desperately. "I'll issue a statement. I'll hold a press conference." "Whatever you need," Ruby laughed, but it came out broken. "Don't you see? That's exactly the problem. You can't just fix this with money or power or statements. Your life is public in a way mine never has been. Every mistake, every rumor, every lie becomes ammunition for strangers to judge us. I can't live like that. So what are you saying?" Julian's voice dropped to barely a whisper. The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken endings. Ruby knew what she should say. The practical thing, the safe thing? But looking at Julian's face, seeing real fear there, real pain, she couldn't say the words. I don't know, she admitted finally. I just need space to think, please. Julian nodded slowly, backing toward the door. I understand, but Ruby, I love you. I should have said it before. I love you, and nothing in that article is true. When you're ready, I'll be waiting. He left, and Ruby crumpled against the counter, finally allowing the tears to fall. The truth comes out that evening. Ruby closed the shop early. She couldn't handle the stares, the whispered conversations, the fake sympathy. Upstairs in her apartment, she wrapped herself in her grandmother's old quilt and tried to make sense of everything. Her phone buzzed constantly. Messages of support from friends, cruel comments from strangers who'd somehow gotten her number, news alerts tracking the story's development. She turned it off. At midnight, she heard the knock. Of course he came. Even now, he kept their routine. Ruby sat in the dark, listening to him knock 3 times, then silence. She imagined him standing outside, hoping, waiting. Her heart ached to go to him, but fear held her frozen. Then she heard his voice, muffled through the door. Ruby, I know you're there. You don't have to open the door. Just listen. Pause. That article was planted by a competitor trying to tank a business deal. My team traced it to Alexander Morton's company. He's been trying to push me out of a tech partnership for months. Ruby moved closer to the door, pressing her hand against it. I've been in the business world long enough to expect corporate sabotage, Julian continued, but I never thought they'd weaponize you against me. I never thought my life would put you in danger like this. If I'd known, I would have been more careful. I would have protected you better. His voice cracked slightly, and Ruby closed her eyes against the wave of emotion. I called a press conference for tomorrow morning, Julian said. I'm going to tell the truth. All of it. About how we met, about what you mean to me, about how the engagement story is fabricated. I'll make sure everyone knows you're not some social climber or gold digger. You're the woman who gave me back my humanity. Ruby's hand moved to the lock before she could stop herself. I know you're scared, Julian whispered. I'm terrified too. Terrified of losing you. Terrified that my world will crush something beautiful before it has a chance to grow. But Ruby, I'd rather try and fail than never try at all. The lock clicked open. Ruby pulled the door back slowly. Julian stood there. Eyes red-rimmed, suit rumpled, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. They stared at each other for a long moment, and then Ruby spoke. You really love me? More than I knew was possible, Julian said simply. Even though I'm nobody special, even though I have nothing to offer but coffee and conversation, you're everything special. Julian took a cautious step forward. You make me laugh. You challenge me. You see past the money and the title to who I really am. Ruby, you gave me a place to be human. That's not nothing. That's everything. Ruby felt her defenses crumbling, felt hope pushing through the fear. I love you too, she whispered. I was too scared to admit it, but I do. I've loved you since you showed up soaked in rain asking for 1 cup of coffee. Julian's face transformed, relief and joy washing over it. Can I come in? Ruby nodded, stepping back. He entered the shop that had become their sanctuary, and she locked the door behind him. Not to keep the world out, she knew that was impossible, but to keep this moment sacred. The press conference the next morning, Ruby stood backstage at Blackwood Technologies' main auditorium, her heart hammering against her ribs. Julian had asked her to be there, and despite every instinct screaming at her to hide, she'd agreed. Through the curtain, she could see the sea of reporters, cameras, and lights. The room buzzed with anticipation. She heard Julian's PR director giving him last-minute instructions, but he waved them away. Julian found Ruby in the wings. You don't have to watch if you don't want to. I want to be here, Ruby said, surprising herself with the truth. If we're doing this, we're doing it together. He kissed her forehead gently, then walked out to face the crowd. The room erupted with questions immediately. Julian raised his hand, and gradually the noise subsided. "I've called this press conference to address yesterday's fabricated engagement announcement," he began, his voice steady and commanding. "The story was false. Vivian Chen and I are not engaged. We are not in a relationship. The photograph was from a charity gala months ago, deliberately misrepresented by competitors trying to damage my company's credibility." Hands shot up, voices clamoring, but Julian continued speaking over them. "But while I'm here, I want to address something more important. There's been speculation about my personal life, about a woman I've been seeing. Her name is Ruby Thompson, and yes, we're together. Yes, I care about her deeply. And no, she's not what the tabloids have tried to paint her as." Ruby's breath caught as Julian looked directly at the camera, as if speaking to the world. "Ruby owns a small coffee shop called Moonbeam Coffee. 3 weeks ago, I walked in there by chance, exhausted and lonely. And she served me coffee and kindness without knowing who I was. She didn't want anything from me except conversation. For the first time in years, I felt like a person instead of a position." His voice softened. "The difference in our backgrounds doesn't matter to me. The money doesn't matter. What matters is that she makes me want to be better. She reminds me why I started this company in the first place, to create something meaningful, not just profitable. And if the price of loving her is dealing with false rumors and invasive attention, I'll pay that price gladly." The room exploded with questions, but Julian raised his hand again. "That's all I have to say. Anyone who has a problem with my relationship can take it up with me directly, not with Ruby. She deserves better than the treatment she's received. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have somewhere more important to be." He walked off stage, ignoring the shouted questions, and found Ruby waiting. She was crying, but smiling through the tears. "You didn't have to do that," she said. Double quotes. "Yes, I did." Julian wiped her tears gently with his thumb. "They needed to know you're not someone they can attack without consequences. And I needed them to know that I'm serious about this. About us." Ruby laughed, shaky but genuine. "Your PR team is going to kill you, probably?" Julian grinned. "But I've never felt more free in my life." 1 year later, the knock came at exactly midnight, as it had every night for the past year. Ruby smiled, wiping her hands on her apron, a new one, since the old one had finally fallen apart. This one had 2 embroidered moons. Side by side, she opened the door to find Julian standing there, but tonight he wasn't alone. Behind him, a camera crew filmed for the documentary about small businesses surviving in the modern economy. Moonbeam Coffee had been chosen as a featured story, especially after Ruby's billionaire boyfriend had helped her expand without losing the shop's character. "Good evening." "Midnight customer," Ruby said, playing to their usual routine for the cameras. "Good evening." "Coffee wizard," Julian replied, stepping inside. "I'll have my usual. Coming right up." The cameras captured Ruby making the cinnamon honey latte that had started everything. Captured the easy warmth between her and Julian. Captured the essence of the shop that had brought them together. When the crew finally left, Ruby flipped the sign too closed and sagged against the counter. "Exhausting," she muttered. Julian laughed, pulling her into his arms. "You were perfect. Grandmother would be proud. They'd visited her grandmother's grave together last month." Ruby introducing Julian to the woman who'd made all this possible. Julian had left flowers and a quiet thank you for raising someone who'd changed his life now. Standing in their coffee shop because Julian had insisted on making Ruby his business partner. Equal shares, Ruby felt the rightness of it all. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been more headlines, more scrutiny, more moments of doubt, but they'd weathered them together. Julian's company had thrived. Ruby's shop had become a neighborhood institution, and their relationship had grown stronger with each challenge overcome. "I have something for you," Julian said suddenly, pulling back. He reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box. Ruby's heart stopped. "Julian, before you panic," he said quickly, "this isn't what you think. I mean, it is, but also it isn't. Just open it." Inside the box sat a delicate silver key on a chain. Ruby looked up, confused. "It's the key to this place," Julian explained. "The one you gave me months ago when you said I should have one since I was here every night anyway. I had it made into a necklace." He paused, suddenly nervous in a way she rarely saw. Ruby Thompson, I'm not asking you to marry me. Not yet. Not until you're ready. But I'm asking you to know that when that day comes, I'll be ready. I'll have been ready since that first midnight when you opened the door. Ruby felt tears spilling over. You impossible, wonderful man. Is that a yes to eventual future consideration? Julian asked, hope and humor mixing in his voice. It's a yes to everything, Ruby said, pulling him down for a kiss that tasted like coffee and cinnamon and possibility. To midnights and mornings? To coffee and conversation? To love that started with one cup and became a lifetime? Outside, the moon hung full and bright over Seattle, casting silver light through the shop windows. And somewhere, Ruby felt certain. Her grandmother was smiling, knowing that sometimes the best things in life come after closing time. To those brave enough to open the door, the coffee maker hissed softly in the background, a familiar soundtrack to their embrace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new headlines, new moments of doubt and triumph. But tonight, in their small coffee shop kingdom, Ruby and Julian had everything they needed.